Hello, DawgNation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We think we have a good show in place for you here today. Before we're done, former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, don't you know he loved what he saw between the hedges on Saturday? We'll ask him in particular about the job that Stetson Bennett did against the Tennessee Vols, quarterbacks understanding the requirements needed for great quarterback play. We'll talk to Jake Fromm about that before the show is done today. Connor Riley going to stop by there as well in Athens yesterday. Aftermath of injury news as it relates to Robert Beal and Marius Mims, A.D. Mitchell, kind of where all that goes as Georgia heads on the road to Mississippi State on Saturday. I'm going to be blunt, honest with you about the Mississippi State game here before the game, the show is done today, too, about my overall feeling about kind of what I hope to see Saturday against these Bulldogs. We'll talk to you about that. But off the top, we're going to share some words with you from a former Alabama quarterback, a very prominent voice who has a connection to the Crimson Tide. Now, part of this is just sort of fun, kind of mocking the current state of Alabama football as it relates and compares to Georgia. But also part of this is a little bit of a furtherance of something we talked about yesterday, which is how come people don't ever seem to see Georgia coming? Not the week before the Tennessee game, not before the season began, not in last year's college football playoff. How come there always seems to be what I would describe as a sort of an unreasonable level of doubt about these Bulldogs? Another way of explaining that here today off the top of the program that we'll have some fun with. And get ready for a chance to own the East on Saturday there at Mississippi State. So let's cover it all right now. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So you may remember on yesterday's show that we talked about there are some things about Georgia that make it a little bit different than the other kind of perennial contenders in college football, and some of that, I think, is what leads to what I think we would describe as, at times, a little bit of an unreasonable level of doubt as it relates to UGA. Now, I am really, really trying when we have this conversation not to kind of go down the path of, media hates my team, or so-and-so doesn't give my team a chance, because we've all kind of been there. We've all kind of felt that. Anybody who is a fan, I remember being a kid when the Braves first made the playoffs for the first time in my lifetime and watching Tim McCarver call those games. Back then, the World Series on CBS. And you sort of felt like, gosh, these announcers just hate my team. And I was feeling that way as a young kid. And at different times in our lifetime, we kind of always feel like the announcers, whoever the announcer is, we kind of always feel like the announcers hate our team. And I'm trying not to do that here because I honestly don't believe there is any large-scale hatred of Georgia on the part of ESPN or CBS or anybody who does this. But I do believe, and I told you this yesterday, that part of the story about why Saturday was so intense, the response of Georgia players on the field, the response of the fans around the stadium, why that entire day was so intense was because I believe there had been a little bit of an unreasonable disregard of Georgia. A lot of folks thought this was going to be a coronation for Tennessee and that Georgia was simply the other team in the game. That seems ridiculous to think now, but a lot of folks, and you know this, thought that going into the game. And I would tell you that it wasn't just leading into Georgia-Tennessee where that was true. Go back before the start of the season. How many times did you hear me say, with Georgia kind of obviously slotted as the third best team in the country behind Ohio State and Alabama, how many times did you hear me say, I've got no problem with any individual who thinks Alabama is better than Georgia or any individual who might think Ohio State's better than Georgia? At the beginning of the season, that seemed like a reasonable point of view. What seemed really weird to me was, and I repeated this pretty frequently, what seemed to be pretty weird to me was the idea that it's a unanimous opinion. Suddenly everyone's sure that the reigning national champs are no better than the third best team to begin this season. That to me seemed like an unreasonable level of certainty about what Georgia wasn't. And I think in retrospect, the point we made back then kind of seems correct. And so what I told you I wanted to do some this week is talk a little bit about what makes Georgia hard to understand. What makes Georgia hard to embrace from some of the people who want to give opinions for a living? And one of the things we talked about yesterday was the idea of complementary football. If you missed yesterday's show, hope you'll go back and listen to it. That at Georgia, offense helps defense, defense helps offense. And, defensive line helps linebackers, linebackers help, defensive secondary, and everybody sort of works together. And if you're really doing complementary football well, That means they're like 30-something players, if not more, who are really, really important to the outcome of a game. And here's what you know, that people kind of embrace simplicity. If you're trying to sell, here's why you should watch this game, it's a lot easier to sell, hey, tune in and watch Hendon Hooker and the Tennessee Vols. That's one name to remember. That's one idea. The quarterback who plays the best is going to win. But at Georgia, the brand of football that Kirby Smart pushes is just a little bit more complicated than that. It's, hey, you got to be aware of who's on the field when Georgia's in its nickel package and what kind of pass pressure you're getting and the rotation happening at left guard and blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's just a lot to remember. And the average Georgia fan kind of laps all that up because he or she really loves this team and wants to get deep in the weeds on all those topics. But the average sort of like casual fan who's busy and, kind of moving around and not paying that much attention, that's just too much to keep up with. So if Georgia doesn't have the one big superstar face to put right there on that graphic next to Hendon Hooker and the Tennessee Vols, well, then all of a sudden Georgia must be a lesser team because I've been trained to believe that great teams have superstar players, and that's one big name to remember, and Georgia just doesn't have that. And that's one of the reasons why I believe at times Georgia has been unfairly disregarded to begin this season and prior to the biggest game of this season against Tennessee this past Saturday. But there is another thing that I think is also true of Georgia that makes it kind of run upstream against kind of the cultural current of college football here right now, if you will. And it's one of those things that I think gives people a little bit of a pause of, or are we sure that Georgia's doing it the right way? No matter how much it's working, are we sure that Georgia's really doing it the right way if they are doing it so different than everybody else? And as a way of setting this up, I want to share some words with you here for a moment. Now, part of me, as much as I don't like to admit this, part of me just enjoys being spiteful every now and then, and part of me just sort of enjoys mocking people that, we've kind of viewed as rivals to this Georgia program. Obviously, Alabama has been a big rival, and Alabama has kind of fallen right now on sort of harder times than we're used to seeing the program getting and having to endure here in the Nick Saban era. So part of what I'm about to do is just sort of good old-fashioned, I guess, trolling, or just, kind of good old-fashioned pettiness and spitefulness. It's kind of funny to see Alabama fans really unhappy and upset right now. I wish I wasn't that way. I wish I was a better person, but at times maybe I'm just not. But in addition to the sort of general spitefulness of ha, 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 look how bad Alabama is right now, I think there's also kind of an important message here, is that over the course of time, we have been told, ooh, Kirby Smart's too resistant to change. Kirby Smart's cut from an old school cloth. And that's never said in a positive light. That somehow Kirby Smart is kind of this archetype of a brand of football that no longer exists. And the willingness to evolve that other coaches have, that makes them better than Kirby Smart. But I think some of us who are Georgia fans would say, ooh, I almost wonder if other programs aren't changing a little too much and aren't completely abandoning the foundation that once made them great. And at a place like Alabama, who lost to LSU again on Saturday, I think you see some evidence that maybe that is true. You're going to like this, but I think there's an important point to get to about this. So Greg McElroy's former Alabama quarterback, still lives in Alabama, does the radio show there in Birmingham on WJOX. And a Monday morning show, he went in hard on Alabama. And in doing so, I don't believe he did this intentionally, but in doing so, he actually paid Georgia a really, really big compliment. If you're a UGA fan, you're going to love this, but it's also kind of important because I think it helps explain why Georgia is sort of what it is right now and why that's sort of hard for some people to notice and maybe hard for some people to embrace, no matter how true it might be. This is Greg McElroy from WJOX radio station in Birmingham Monday morning. Take a listen to this.
These guys don't care. You can tell by their mannerisms. You can tell by how they celebrate after every single freaking play. Every touchdown, doing dances. And it's like you can tell. Like, go watch them practice. You watch them practice, it's not the way it was when I was in school. Guys doing stuff with their helmet off. I mean, it's like, dude, it's different. But, it had to be. Sure. Because, the modern day player isn't as into that. They're not as into being coached hard. They're not as into being told that's not going to fly. And that's not me, yelling at the cloud. It's just the reality. If you want the team to look like it looked 10 years ago, a lot needs to change. And the type of players they're bringing in needs to change. Because I can tell you this, you go to a Georgia practice, it doesn't look like it looks. It looks a lot like the practice that I grew up in. And those players play a lot like the players that I played with. Like, it's that team, they're cut from a different cloth. Why? I don't know. Maybe they haven't made. Maybe they don't care so much about NIL. Don't get me wrong, they got it. Maybe they don't care as much about that. The culture's very firmly and clearly established there. They have great leaders within the program.
Can you imagine how hard that must be for a former Alabama quarterback to have to say? And maybe more important than that, for a lot of Alabama fans listening on the radio 2 days after their team had lost LSU and kind of eliminated any chance they had, for the most part, of participating in the college football playoff, winning a national championship. Can you imagine how hard that must be to hear that Georgia, the team that they used to sort of think they were always going to be better than, all of a sudden now has what they used to have? Players who are fully committed, practices that are preparing for greatness, and every step, every day being taken towards trying to compete and win championships. That Georgia now has that. It's on display during practice. And McElroy, who I'm assuming attends a good number of Alabama practices, says, I don't see that when I look in Tuscaloosa. I see players who are too worried about celebrating after big plays, or too worried about their NIL, or too worried about the whatever, and they just don't have that anymore. Can you imagine how tough that must be to hear those things if you're an Alabama fan coming from a quarterback who kind of knew what it was about when the Alabama program was first being established? Greg McElroy was a part of some of that initial success for Nick Saban, which laid the foundation for all the future success the program would have. And now this is his diagnosis of the current state with the Crimson Tide. If you're an Alabama fan, that must be very, very tough to hear. And by contrast, by the way, yesterday during his weekly press conference, Kirby Smart was asked. He was actually asked by Connor Riley, who's going to join us here in a moment. But he was asked, one of the things that we would all say coming off the Tennessee game is Georgia won that game because it was the tougher team. And in his post-game press conference on Saturday, Kirby Smart said that one of the stories of the game was the ability to be physical, just to go out there and be more physically tough than a team like Tennessee. That's one of the ways in which you kind of got that win. Well, Kirby was asked yesterday, how do you cultivate that physical and mental toughness? And it wasn't necessarily asked in contrast to a place like Alabama, but the words that Smart uses are sharp contrast to what Greg McElroy says he sees at Alabama practices, where that standard is just gone. Where they don't have that level of leadership, they don't have that level of commitment, they don't have that level of toughness. At a place like Georgia, how do you get that? Kirby Smart was very clear in his answer yesterday. Here's Kirby.
Yeah, we hit mentally tough and physically tough. We hit a lot. So they get that speech before they come, because I don't want to lie to them. So tell them we're going to be in pads Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and we're going to be physical, and we're going to practice physical. We're going to be physical in the spring. We're going to be comfortable being physical. So that's agreed upon when they come.
I think that's a really fascinating answer from Kirby Smart. And I think one of the things that Kirby kind of intuitively understands, and maybe he wouldn't say it this way, but I think this is what this sort of comment is leading to, is that in life it's better to get a hard no than a soft yes. In other words, it's better to have people know at the outset, oh, Georgia's not a program I want to be a part of. It's better to have them know that clearly at the beginning, as opposed to, yeah, I'll take a shot at Georgia. They love they're having some fun over there. I'll go see if that program's for me, only to find out that the expectations are too demanding and you don't really fit in too well here. Better to have a hard no, and at times recruits have given Georgia a hard no. Better to have a hard no than a soft yes. Somebody who shows up but doesn't understand the expectations and therefore can't be fully committed to all of that. Kirby Smart says we hit. We hit on Tuesdays, we hit on Wednesdays, we hit on Thursdays. We tell these guys, hey, you want to come here, you're going to be in full pads. And you're going to come here, you're going to be asked to hit. You're going to be asked to be physically tough. Which kind of circles back around to what I was saying a moment ago. Why is it sometimes that people have a hard time understanding how good Georgia is, are kind of slow to embrace how good Georgia is? Beginning of the season, we saw that being true. Before the Tennessee game, we saw that being true. And I think all of this is sort of an example of that. Nick Saban has been celebrated as a hero because he's evolving to understand what football is now. And Kirby Smart sometimes, I think, unfairly sort of maligned as sort of a caveman. Oh, Kirby Smart's, cut from some old school cloth. He's not changing and getting with the times. Football is not supposed to be this physical anymore. There are a lot of people who want to take the physicality out of the game. It's not supposed to be this physical anymore. At one point in time, the archetype of a great football coach was kind of like an army general, kind of like, somebody who would lead in war. That's kind of what you sort of thought of when you thought of football coaches. But as of late in recent years, think about the football coaches who've gained fame and gained, kind of respect and kind of admired. they're less like Army generals and they're more like tech billionaires, right? Like think about Sean McVay, younger looking guy, kind of celebrated for being smart more so than for being just tenacious and tough. Not to say that he's not. I'm just saying that you're sort of celebrating the cerebral part of this a little bit more. I would say Ryan Day at Ohio State's a little bit kind of like that too, where it's like the archetype of the current football coach is sort of young guy, stubbly beard, who's a diabolical genius in how he's drawing up mastermind type plays on a dry erase board somewhere, and he understands the analytics, and he's blah, 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 blah. That's kind of the new archetype of a football coach. It's more tech billionaire than old school leader of men like an Army general. And Kirby Smart just stands as a sharp contrast to all that, which is not to say that he's not smart or anything like that. You understand the point that I'm making. But if you're drawing a simple caricature, Kirby's a little bit more of what football coaches used to be and not quite so much with the current of what football coaches seem to be moving in the direction of right now. And I think it makes, Georgia at times easy to disregard and say, well, if they're so not on trend, they must be likely to lose because a team like Tennessee feels very, very trendy and very, very hot coming into a game like Saturday. And I think that kind of helps explain how come it is that Georgia's always seemingly having to prove itself, no matter how many times it has proved itself in the recent past. And when you listen to Greg McElroy over in Alabama, or Alabama fans who would probably echo some of what McElroy's saying, the stuff that Kirby has at Georgia in Tuscaloosa right now, they really miss it. And it's not to say that Georgia's going to be on top forever or Alabama will never be on top again. It's simply to take a snapshot of the current state of affairs and say the requisite toughness that all championship teams must have, Georgia has a lot more of that than a lot of the other programs, Alabama included, seem to have here at the moment. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, we start at 9:45 for our 1st and 15 on DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app after that. At same time. DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, both taking place there at 9:45 for our 1st and 15. 10 a.m. after that on all the other platforms, Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Twitch and all of that for you there live on video. Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Podcasts wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify, world-famous DawgNation.com. Talked about tech billionaires a moment ago. We're thankful for them because they create these platforms that we can do the show on. So I guess they're at least good for something when it comes to that. But nonetheless, glad to have you with us as a part of it today. And our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia making it all possible. Now listen, when it comes to your home, and on Saturday we saw Georgia making itself quite at home, Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium. When it comes to your home, anything that threatens, much the same way the Vols tried to invade Athens on Saturday, if you've got things invading your home like water intrusion, things like that, hey, this is where our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia can step up and do great work for you. They're longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily. They're proud partners of UGA there as well. So we certainly appreciate your support of them because of the way in which they've supported us. We're grateful for that. But if you're dealing with foundation issues, waterproofing issues, Engineered Solutions of Georgia is just a name to know because they've got an unparalleled amount of resources they want to marshal for your benefit and go to work for you there. An entire team of engineers on staff, for instance. There's nobody else in our market that can say they've got the same kind of thing ready to get to work for you there. So all the more reason why you want to give Engineered Solutions a call. The number, easy to remember there as well, 678-ESOG now, 678-ESOG now. So if you see water creeping in where it's not supposed to be, you see cracks in your walls, down there in your foundation, your basement, somewhere like that, hey, don't hesitate to find out what's really going on. If it's a simple fix, they'll tell you. If it's some more substantial work than that, then you want smart people doing it. My friends over at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, they are definitely that. So one more time, give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That is 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, before we're done, it's Jake Fromm. What was it like being Stetson Bennett on a day like this, and what did he think of Stetson? Obviously, Jake will have plenty to say on that, including, I guess, the very funny aftermath of all this and the way in which Stetson was trolled by those Tennessee fans leading into the game. We'll get some stuff from Jake there on that today. And obviously Connor Riley coming up here in a moment too. What was happening in Athens yesterday, getting ready for the next big game for Georgia on the road at Mississippi State on Saturday. In fact, let's kind of transition to that now before we get to Connor. Let's do Around the Doghouse, presented today by Georgia's own credit union. I have to admit here is that on Saturday, when I think about the Mississippi State game, if you want to go back to prior to the year beginning, Back in the summer, we talked about, the season a lot, what we kind of expected. When folks would ask me what's the toughest game that Georgia's going to play, I said I think consistently every single time, I believe it's probably on the road at Mississippi State. And a lot has changed since then. We've learned a lot. We've seen a lot. And yet I'm still reminded of back when I was of sort of fresh mind without any kind of recency bias or anything like that. This was a game I viewed to be pretty tough. So getting ready for it on Saturday, I think for Georgia, is obviously a really important thing. You can clinch the East by winning here on the road turf of a West team, but beyond all of that, it's just a next journey towards go for 2-22, something you've heard us talk about quite a lot. And by the way, Georgia will play in this game fresh off getting patted on the back a bunch, something that sort of scares some of y'all, and having that number 1 ranking next to its name. And Kirby was asked this week, okay, well, how do you shake off all of that? How do you push aside and ask the players who are going to see all this kind of stuff? How do you get them to push all this aside and get focused on the task at hand against the Maroon Bulldogs on Saturday? And this is what Kirby Smart had to say about that.
We just don't talk about it much. I mean, they understand it's wasted energy when you talk about it and you guys want to write about it and do all that. You just focus on Mississippi State and what do we have to do to play well against them? What do we have to do to play well on the road in the SEC? Those are the focus. That's nothing but a number and a distraction, and it's irrelevant. It just doesn't really matter. So I don't, they see it, but they don't get it discussed around here, because I think the more you talk about it, the more attention you bring to it.
So if Kirby says not talking about being number 1, simply talking about playing Mississippi State and what has to be done to beat Mississippi State, well, in that case, what does have to be done to Mississippi State to beat Mississippi State? What should we know about Mike Leach's team for Saturday? And Kirby went into more detail about that yesterday too.
Very different, really different 2 ways. Different defensively. Their defense coordinator does an incredible job. Different kind of scheme than we've faced before. And then offensively, obviously, they're very different. And people would probably think they're similar to Tennessee, but they're really not similar to Tennessee. So it's be kind of the 3rd week of facing a different kind of offense in terms of what they do offensively, and very, very few of our calls and schemes carry over from 1 week to the next when you play this offense.
Yeah, so my understanding of this is, as Kirby says, schematically it's not similar to Tennessee, but I would say, at least my feeling of this is, it's somewhat similar from the standpoint that Tennessee's a little bit of a particular team. They do things sort of their own way, which is different than the way that most people do it. I would say that Mississippi State, for a long time, it's kind of been the same kind of thing. These Mike Leach teams are just a little bit different than what you see on a sort of week-to-week basis. And so when Kirby has been talking about some of the extra prep that Georgia's gotten, I think some people think, that was just for Tennessee because Tennessee's so good. But the truth is, as we said weeks ago, that Georgia was probably also getting extra prep for Mississippi State around that same time, because it's just a little bit different than what you normally expect. At times, even though the Mississippi State and Tennessee offenses are very different, Kirby's compared them both a little bit to sort of triple option style things, the sort of thing you don't see on a week-to-week basis. And so therefore, much the same way that Georgia got extra prep to get ready for Tennessee, my guess is they've sought out some extra prep to get ready for Mississippi State too. I think it's fair to assume they probably have done that. And then one more thing here, we did see Mississippi State in Athens back in 2020. Georgia was a huge favorite that day and was frankly lucky to win the game. How is this Mississippi State team that Georgia sees on Saturday maybe different from the one that came to Athens during the pandemic year of 2020? One more from Kirby breaking all that down.
A lot more experienced quarterback. That was the kickoff for him. And he played really well in that game and kind of got a lot of confidence. Playing against us, and he's I don't know how many games he's played since then, but a lot. He's broken a lot of records. He's very intelligent. He doesn't make mistakes. He uses Coach Leach's offense to his strength, and they understand, very similar to last week, triple options. They know who they are. They have answers for what they do. They're usually one step ahead of their answers than you are, because you don't play against it but once a year, and they do it all the time. So they have exposure to everything every defense has tried on them, and their quarterback's very experienced, and that's the biggest difference. Defensively, they may not be the same players they were, because a lot of those guys are gone. They are extremely physical, disruptive. Defense coordinator does a great job. Zach Arndt does a great job with it.
So we do a fan-oriented show around here. I'm a fan. You're a fan. We speak as fans to each other. And so fan to fan, quick admission here for a moment. I think it's probably saying too much to say I'm worried about this game on Saturday, but I'll be happy to tell you this. All I care about is Georgia winning. This is not style point Saturday for me. This isn't like beauty contest Saturday for me. I'm not looking to see Georgia go up there and hang 50 points. I'd be happy if they did. I'm at least concerned enough about this game that I'll just be simply happy if they win. And that's kind of enough for me on a day like this. It's not because Mississippi State's the best team in the world. They're clearly not. But it is a tough road spot. The night game makes it a little tougher. We said this before the start of this season. We must have been on to something back in the summer to have us believe this be the case. So I'm reminded now what we said all that time back then. And there's enough about Mississippi State to me to make you think, hey, you better go in there and be ready to be something close to your best on Saturday. And if you win, regardless of what the final margin of victory is, take it as a good thing, own the East, claim that division title, and get ready for another road game next Saturday against Kentucky. This is a little bit of a challenging stretch here for Georgia, and finding the sort of same level of mental toughness to move towards this portion of the schedule will really, in a lot of ways, be just as important as what was required to get ready for Tennessee last Saturday. So that's Around the Doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union. Of course, I am traveling to Starkville for the weekend. Many of you are there, too, or you're going to Lexington the following week after that. It's one of those things where the credit card just sort of gets swiped a lot this time of year, rental cars and hotels and starting to buy these holiday gifts and things like that. Well, when you're doing all of that, great to have one of those Visa Signature and Platinum cards from our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union to make the stuff that you're already buying a more enjoyable experience. Because when you get one of those Visa Signature or Platinum cards from Georgia's Own Credit Union, you're going to get a chance to get some flex rewards, which can be used for just about anything. Gift cards, cash back, travel, merchandise, so much more. And you could even get up to $150 when you open a new Platinum or Signature card. And there are some restrictions that apply. So to find out more about all of this, go to georgiasown.org. That is georgiasown.org. Great to have Georgia's Own Credit Union as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. All right, we have a lot going on today's show. Before we're done, it is Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback. You know he had a lot to say about, or we'll have a lot to say about what happened against Tennessee, in particular the performance of Stetson Bennett and the Georgia offense swinging some haymakers early. We'll find out from Jake about that before we're done. But for now, on what happened in Athens yesterday, getting ready for these Bulldogs, the aftermath of the win against Tennessee, let's cover all of that right now. Let's do a Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Connor Riley here, Kroger Fresh Take with him. And I was just talking about the Georgia-Mississippi State game. We'll get there in a moment, including Kirby Smart and the Georgia players' perspective on that, Connor having been in Athens yesterday. Prior to that, Connor, I know you had to watch the Georgia-Tennessee game from afar on Saturday, but nonetheless, you've already had plenty to say about it. You've certainly written plenty about it at DawgNation.com. When it's all said and done, what is the, I guess, sort of lone takeaway from you for the Dogs against the Vols? What did we learn about UGA? How will the day be remembered in your mind?
On Thursday, this Georgia team, the culture that Kirby Smart has built, this is the both physical and mentally toughest team in the country, and that makes you really, really hard to beat. BA, I'm sure you've seen the movie Swingers, correct?
Of course.
So, you know, in that movie, there's the famous scene where they're playing NHL 93, and Vince Vaughn's buddy is saying, oh, the Kings, they're a finesse team. They've got Gretzky,
right.
They're scoring all these points. And Vaughn just keeps asking, hey, I'm going to make Gretzky's head bleed. That is essentially what Georgia is doing to teams at this point in time. You saw that on Saturday against Tennessee. This is still a very good Tennessee team, and a team that has a very real shot of making the playoffs and certainly winning out and finishing the season on 11-1. And at no point after, say, Georgia's third drive of the game on Saturday, they have any chance of winning. They went out there and really just punked Tennessee from the jump. And it's a credit to what Georgia has built over the course of years. And I think it was very telling. In Kirby's first comments to Jenny Dell of CBS right after the game, he mentioned that Georgia didn't bring anyone in via the transfer portal. That's a very strange time to make that comment. But I think the win on Saturday said so much about the culture and what Kirby Smart has built on Saturday. It was not just a win because obviously Georgia had more talented players and a better coaching staff. It was a thorough win because of what they have built over the course of years. And when you juxtapose that with what has happened to Alabama, not just on Saturday, but over the course of the season, I think it makes the win and what Georgia is right now even more eye-opening.
And I don't know if you agree with this or not, but like one of the things I've talked about from Saturday's game is this wasn't like Notre Dame in 2019. That was a festival of sorts. People wanted to see the light show. There was a genuine curiosity of, this team from outside the region is coming to Athens, and yet 2 years prior to that, Notre Dame had showed Georgia a lot of hospitality. I think that Georgia fans genuinely kind of wanted to reciprocate some of that with Notre Dame. That was a little bit of a festival of college football. On Saturday, there was kind of an edginess to the day, and I think Georgia fans were in a very bad mood. I think the team was in a very bad mood. I think part of this is, while I do not believe that Georgia is hated by the media, I do believe that they have been unfairly disregarded coming into the game prior to the start of the season, when everybody seemed to agree they were clearly worse than Alabama and Ohio State. And one of the things we've tried to sort of seek out is, why is it that Georgia's always having to prove itself? And I think part of this is that Georgia is very, very physical at a time in which a lot of people think the physicality should be taken out of the game. And Georgia's complementary football at a time in which superstars are being sold. It's not Hendon Hooker and the Tennessee Vols. It's like 30-something guys for Georgia that are really important. And people don't embrace that level of complexity. They would prefer simplicity. And you can't simply sell Georgia in just one sentence. That a lot of the stuff that is making Georgia great is also making Georgia harder for some people to understand, and that's why there was seemingly a one-way street of love for the Vols going into this game on Saturday, and a little bit of a one-way street away from Georgia prior to the season beginning, I believe. Do you agree?
I definitely think this Georgia team felt slighted on Saturday, and that fed into the performance that they had. Stetson Bennett, obviously, we don't need to rehash why he has been slighted so many times, but he plays with a chip on his shoulder, and the team takes after that. I think Keely Ringo felt slighted after what, his name got dragged through the mud, and not just by national media. There were Georgia fans that were very critical of him even before he made the big interception on Saturday. So it is a team-wide noticing that, hey, we're a really talented team. We've won every game we've played this season, and yet 92% of the public money comes in on Tennessee last week. Every regular analyst except for Luke Bryan picks Tennessee to win in Athens on College game day. I mean, it was everybody in the world lining up to pick Tennessee, and Georgia just frankly went out there and made them look very, very dumb. And so I do think that this is a Georgia team that plays at its best when it is most publicly doubted. And it's going to be interesting going forward. It doesn't really seem like Georgia's going to be doubted in the same sort of manner. Maybe the Ohio State game, if they go out and have an impressive performance against Michigan, maybe everyone will jump on them going into the into the college football playoff there. But I think the win on Saturday really gave Georgia and earned them the benefit of the doubt. And it's really interesting. When the rain started coming down there in the second half, I was getting flashbacks to the 2015 Alabama game, really the end of the Mark Richt tenure there in Athens. That was just a game where big game feel. It obviously rained a lot more in that Alabama game than it did that Tennessee game. But just there was an anger, I think, in the fan base that day that stewed, stemming from just getting punked on their home field. Well, I think on Saturday, those rain demons were taken out on Tennessee, where from what I saw from people in the crowd and from people I've talked to that were there in the stadium, they were having a ton of fun in the rain, and the rain actually amplified the experience they had there in the second half. And the image I'll take away from Saturday is that last sack that Hendon Hooker had. He's just on their final offensive play. He's on his hands and his knees, and his head is hanging in defeat. And he just looks like a guy that had just gotten the tar beat out of him like a piñata for 4 straight hours. And the Georgia fans and players were just so thrilled with what they had done on Saturday.
I think a lot of what you're saying is absolutely right and absolutely true there. Now you turn the page to Mississippi State. We heard from Kirby Smart on our show a little bit earlier, and obviously you were there and talked to some Georgia players there yesterday too. Connor, if I go back to before the season began and when folks would ask me, hey, what's the toughest game that Georgia's going to play this season, I almost always said at Mississippi State. Maybe sometimes I would also mention at Kentucky, but this was the game that probably loomed as the biggest test for Georgia. Now, we've learned a lot since then that maybe we didn't know at the beginning of the year, but I have to kind of circle back to what was it about this game, this spot, that kind of stood out to me back during the summer, and how much of that might still be true. And I have to say that I think maybe some of that does still linger. I'm a fan. I want Georgia to win. And on this particular Saturday, Connor, I'll be happy with a win. I'm not looking for style points. I'm not looking for a beauty contest. I'm not looking for anything. I'm looking for a W. So what do you think about Georgia, Mississippi State? Is this still the kind of challenging game that someone like me said that it would be before the season began?
I do think it's going to be a challenge for a number of reasons. I think this is a Mississippi State team that certainly with their defense is more physical than what you saw from Tennessee a week ago. And while it's not necessarily a statistically great Mississippi State defense, they're going to want to hit you. And let's go back to that 2020 game where, I mean, you and I know some of the behind-the-scenes details. That was a Mississippi State team that maybe had 35 possible available players in that game, and they really took it to Georgia. I think Georgia finished that game with like 7 rushing yards. So this is a team that they're going to want to be super physical with you, and I'll be interested in seeing how Georgia responds and plays to that. And look, it's going to be loud there on Saturday. They're going to have those cowbells ringing, and I know they nearly gave that game away against Auburn in a similar sort of setup last week, but you got the number 1 team in the country coming off a very emotional win. I don't think Georgia's going to be in a letdown spot here, but this is a Mississippi State team that's going to bring it. And for everyone saying, oh, well, they shut out Tennessee and limited them a week ago, Kirby Smart talked about this yesterday. This Mississippi State passing offense is wildly different from what Tennessee wants to do. Tennessee wants to go downfield, take deep shots, and Georgia said, we're going to play man-to-man coverage and feel really good about how our corners are going to hold up against your wide receivers. Go back and watch the 2020 LSU game if you think you can just man up on Mississippi State, Mike Leach, and Will Rogers, because you cannot do that against this offense. You're going to have to sit in zone, and you're going to have to tackle well. Now, while I do think Keely Ringo, Kamari Lassiter, Malachi Starks, who I've got a story coming up on, who I thought played really, really well again on Saturday, if Georgia's able to tackle well, I think they're going to limit what Mississippi State is going to be able to do. But this is a very different team than what we saw against Tennessee. And while even though they like to throw the ball around a lot, I think that's going to present an interesting challenge. And look, the last time Georgia went on the road in a night game environment in the SEC, they needed 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns to come away with a 26-22 win over a Missouri team that's very much just okay. This Mississippi State team is better than that Missouri team is. So Georgia's going to have to play better this Saturday on the road against Mississippi State.
I want to ask you a long-range question about the rest of the season here in a moment. Before that, though, let me remind folks, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here today on DawgNation Daily. And obviously this month with our friends at Kroger, we're excited about Kroger Chef Jr., its return, the guided kid cooking experience where your children get a chance to learn exactly how food's prepared and get to participate in that process, which makes them obviously more excited and engaged about eating healthier foods for them or just really good tasting foods like this month. How about the festive fall muffins? What a great way to kind of roll into the holiday season. Our friends at Kroger are letting your kids do that with the Kroger Chef Jr. here this month. So you got an opportunity to do this coming up on November 12th, which is really fun. It's a 30-minute class. It's just $7 per child. And in addition to cooking the food item, you're also going to get an apron and a patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card and box, and a mini muffin pan. So go to KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. KrogerChefJr.com. That's the word junior spelled out, Junior, for a lot more on that today. So, Connor, let's look ahead to, as we're calling it around here, go for 2 and 22, the chance to win another national championship. And it's really interesting how the landscape has changed around Georgia. Alabama seemingly eliminated. Clemson, hard to take them seriously after what they did against Notre Dame on Saturday. Ohio State struggled against Northwestern. I still think the Buckeyes are really good, but they're now kind of facing more doubters in maybe comparison like a team like Michigan than they've faced before. You think about a scenario for Georgia here where the playoff could be a Michigan team that Georgia beat up badly a year ago, an Oregon team that Georgia beat up badly to start this season, a Tennessee team that Georgia just handled, an LSU team, the SEC championship that's already lost twice. It's really amazing how the path suddenly got way clearer for Georgia on like one Saturday. And obviously nothing's guaranteed here, and Georgia's got to still continue to play well. We understand all of that. But boy, it was quite an interesting Saturday for Georgia as far as its national championship future might have been concerned. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and this is a thing where, again, this is a sport where it is played predominantly by kids 18 to 22, 23 years old. I know the pandemic has raised the age that some of these kids are in terms of how long they're playing college football.
As Warren Brinson told Hendon Hooker on Instagram, by the way.
Yeah. Hendon Hooker, as much love as he gets, no one seems to bring up the fact that he's only like 4 months younger than Stetson Bennett.
Yeah.
I think, it's a team where it's a sport where, again, like the biggest thing and the hardest thing is just getting players to play consistent on a week-in, week-out basis when they are that young and they haven't seen as much. And that's the most impressive thing about Georgia. I think other than the Missouri game this season, this Georgia team has been incredibly consistent over the course of the 4 quarters when they step on the field. And so, and sure, you can mention maybe third quarter of the Kent State game, third quarter of the Florida game as well, if you want to be nitpicky here. But over the course of the entire season, Georgia has just been the most consistent team week in, week out. You know, we know what they're getting from their defense. We know what we're going to get from this offense, where they're going to blow you away for, you know, a solid first half and then decide, all right, are we going to keep scoring, or are we just going to rest and try and get this game over with, get healthy, and get to the next week? Because we're not playing to win every single week. We're playing to win on the last game of the season, and Georgia, I think, is certainly well positioned for that. Now, you know, I have to continue to take care of business, and watching LSU these past couple of weeks, while yes, they do have losses to Tennessee and to Florida State, you know, that's a game where, because there's a very real scenario where if LSU wins this week and Alabama wins this week, LSU wins the SEC West and punches their ticket to Atlanta. Jaden Daniels is playing really, really well right now, and that's really maybe the first game where you look at Georgia's schedule and be like, man, that's a game where Georgia would really love to have Nolan Smith, because what he does in terms of chasing guys sideline to sideline and his athleticism. You know, Robert Beal's a really good player, and it does sound like Georgia's going to have him this week. Chaz Chambliss and Marvin Jones, I thought, played well when called upon on Saturday. But in that SEC championship game against an LSU team, which I think we can allow ourselves to look ahead to as it stands right now, how Georgia goes about defending Jaden Daniels is going to be really, really interesting in that spot. And this is an LSU team that I think we've seen get better over the course of the season. They've come a long way since losing to Florida State in the first week of the season. And so, again, you mentioned Alabama, you know, what happened with them. Clemson clearly taking a step back for really, I think, the second year in a row. And even though the record is better, this team is not any better than they were a season ago. This is a Georgia team that has just, even after all the losses they suffered from last year's team in terms of personnel, has been able to maintain and stay consistent with the Georgia standard at a time when Alabama, Clemson, even, you know, LSU, a recent national championship winner, went down and up. It seems like right now, Georgia's ability to stay consistent is what has made them the most impressive team in college football.
Connor, great stuff. Thanks for being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take here today. We'll look forward to reading a lot more from you at DawgNation.com. May even try to connect with you on video later on tonight, depending on how this playoff ranking shakes out. And obviously back here again very soon on DawgNation Daily as well.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, very interesting, man. I still think Ohio State's an incredibly dangerous team. I know they're kind of getting their share of criticism right now because the Northwestern game didn't go particularly well last Saturday. But, you know, I feel the same way about Ohio State coming off that game as I would about maybe Georgia coming off a Missouri game or something like that. Sometimes you just sort of shrug. The standard isn't perfection. The standard is excellence. There's no doubt that Ohio State's an excellent team. But right now, that's really the only team that I would put in kind of that excellent category as a potential threat to UGA. In every other single instance, you're talking about a game in which Georgia ought to be expected to win. The Ohio State's a fight for the ages, maybe. Everything else, though, that Georgia potentially could play is one of those games where it sort of feels like you've seen Georgia thrive against an opponent like that, or at least that particular opponent in the very near past. So it could be a very interesting discussion here in the weeks to come as we talk about go for 2 in 22 is a very real possibility. And by the way, speaking of real possibilities, also a real possibility for you to enjoy a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Y'all know I've got, I've already got a handful of cruises here on the agenda coming up. One coming up in December, one coming up in February. Obviously, the DawgNation cruise coming up in April. And then yesterday, I had a very real conversation about the possibility of, hey, maybe another Royal Caribbean cruise could be added to the upcoming agenda. So I obviously love it. My family loves it. We think your family and whoever your special someone is, you would love it there as well. In fact, if you want to try one for the first time, a great suggestion would be to try Independence of the Seas with us coming up this April. It's the DawgNation cruise. You go to royaldogs.com, find out more about this. That's royaldogs.com. Or give Jessica Slater a call. She's a travel agent specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to get all this booked and handle all of the logistics for the big DawgNation cruise, the second ever DawgNation cruise. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. And she'll tell you all about the big events happening on Independence of the Seas, leaving April 24th out of Port Canaveral, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, Perfect Day, Coco Cay, doing all the great things you can do on board Independence of the Seas. And also, there's some of those special DawgNation-only events that make a DawgNation cruise so much fun. We had a great NFL draft party last year. We're going to do another one of those again to kind of cap off the week. It's like the final night of the cruise. That's really perfect, so we'll do all of that. Want you to be a part of it. And if you're watching on video, you also see some scenes there from the upcoming Icon of the Seas. It'll debut January of 2024, going out of Miami. It'll be a completely new standard in the cruise industry, and that's what Royal Caribbean's always doing. They're sort of pushing that envelope and making the cruise experience better and better and bigger and bigger and grander with each and every ship they introduce into the fleet. And that's one of the things we love about our friends at Royal Caribbean. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC here, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And let's start with Alabama running back commit Justice Haynes. Could not help but notice Jeff Sentell had a very interesting blurb regarding Haynes and a recent update at DawgNation.com after Haynes visited Georgia for the Tennessee game on Saturday. I'm just going to read you here a couple of sentences. Jeff saying of Justice, I don't know what's going to happen here. I'm not sure anyone can craft a credible paragraph that says they do. Haynes has been a well-thought-out and responsible young man in our many interactions over the years. He's not a waffler, and yet I can't help but feel that Georgia helped itself with its latest visit. He says you had to wonder how a national recruit in UGA legacy like Haynes thinks about what's happening in Alabama. Obviously, as we talked about, not going particularly well, and the environment on Saturday for Georgia couldn't have been better, and his father, Veron, getting a huge eruption cheer when the hobnail boot play was shown on video. We'll talk to Jeff more about this on Friday. Jeff will have his own show coming up on Wednesday before the hedges, but the idea that Georgia game could have been a little bit of a momentum changer for Haynes or another chapter in the recruitment of a guy like, say, Damon Wilson, very, very interesting. Stay close to Dog Nation for a lot more on that. Alabama plays Ole Miss on Saturday. Ole Miss is a pretty good team this year, and Alabama's obviously likely to be in a bad mood after having lost LSU, but right now you sort of wonder, is Alabama good enough to do anything when it's feeling ornery? However, Lane Kiffin doing what some coaches do, kind of padding up the opponent they're about to play. He was talking about the things that are being said of Nick Saban, I guess from Paul Feinbaum in particular, and one of the things that Kiffin said is he, I guess, texted Feinbaum and said that, you're giving, we talk about rat poison from time to time, that what Feinbaum was actually giving Saban, according to Kiffin, was goat fuel, basically making, the goat fired up to come back and be better than ever. And part of that's just related to the fact that Ole Miss is about to play Alabama, and so Lane Kiffin's going to be careful with some of this kind of stuff. You don't want to give too much extra motivation to your opponent. But I've also said this many times before. Lane Kiffin pays a lot of deference to Nick Saban. Lane Kiffin is very subservient to Saban. It's one of the reasons why Saban, I think, seems to like Kiffin so much, is because Kiffin clearly sees himself as kind of an understudy to Saban, whereas guys like Kirby Smart have sort of seen themselves as an equal to Nick Saban. Jimbo Fisher kind of the same way. It hasn't always worked out well for everybody who's tried to go against Saban, but clearly Kirby Smart does not want to be seen as underneath Nick Saban, whereas I think in Lane Kiffin's case, he's more than happy to be viewed that way, which is why, and I'm being very serious here, if I am Auburn, I would think twice about hiring Lane Kiffin as my coach. In fact, I probably would not want to hire Kiffin as my coach. If I had the choice of a guy like, say, Hugh Freeze, who, baggage aside, and obviously that's a hard thing to push aside, but if I had a chance to hire a guy like Hugh Freeze, who's beaten Saban twice, who's kind of gone head-to-head on the recruiting trail, no matter how Freeze may have won those battles, he still won some of those battles, that this is to me a guy that's a lot more willing to embrace being a nemesis to Saban, whereas Lane Kiffin, I think, sort of likes the idea of sort of treating Nick Saban like he's a sort of forever mentor. And I don't think that's what you want from the Auburn coach. So when I hear Lane Kiffin saying these kinds of things, it makes me wonder, what does Auburn think about this? Because a lot of folks have kind of wondered, maybe Auburn would like to have Lane Kiffin as its next coach. But not bending the knee so frequently to Nick Saban, that's just not what the Auburn coach needs to do, and I think that Kiffin does that way too much. Speaking of the Auburn job, Dan Lanning was asked about that yesterday, and I guess there had been some online chatter about this. A lot of this kind of coming from more like sort of fan-centric places, not necessarily robust sourcing on some of this, but nonetheless, Dan Lanning made it very clear that he says the grass is very green here. Obviously, a kind of a reference to sometimes the grass being greener other places. Dan Lanning says he doesn't necessarily view it that way. I think most people sort of took this as sort of a strong statement that that he is happy at Oregon and not right now making himself a candidate for the Auburn job, saying that he'd like to be in Eugene for as long as they would have him. So I guess that's enough for right now. There has been some discussion of exactly how much Auburn wants to pay for its next coach. They clearly pay a lot for buyouts, but how much do they want to pay for employment here? I guess there's some debate about how much Auburn's really ponying up to make its next coach, and in some respects, how long of a contract they're willing to give with longer contracts, the likes of which Jimbo Fisher and Kirby Smart have, a little bit more in vogue as of late. That's probably something to also watch there as well. And then one more thing I saw where Sam Pittman, the Arkansas coach, has suspended a couple of players. I guess they had an altercation after the game on Saturday against Liberty. And this will give me a springboard to say something I don't love saying, but I have to admit I believe is true. I'm a big fan of Pittman at Arkansas and a big believer in what they have been doing there in Fayetteville. I think if you're Arkansas right now, you got to be really careful that some of the momentum that you've had in the first couple of years for Pittman on the job, you may have a hard time maintaining. They have played a very tough schedule. Their non-conference schedule, in addition to playing the SEC West, has just been really, really tough. And so I hope that whatever magic they once had, they find a way to recapture, because I like Pittman. I'd love to see him succeed. But admittedly, maybe the 2022 season not going as well there in Fayetteville as they would have hoped will make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And great guest to bring on our show right now, a guy that I know had to be thrilled with what he saw on Saturday. His former team getting as big a win as we've seen Georgia get there between the hedges. It's Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily. Jake, I'm sure you wish you could have been there, but I'm sure you were also enjoying watching it. What did it feel like to watch the Dogs go out and get that win against Tennessee on Saturday?
Hey, Brandon, what's going on? Thank you for having me. Man, it was awesome to watch the Dogs take care of business on Saturday, set the standard for college football. Personally, myself, I thought it was a little, just a little bit of poetic justice. They rank us at 3, put Tennessee at 1, and then just to go and take care of business at home. The crowd got into it. The defense played extremely well, and really just firing on all cylinders.
I'm curious, as a player who understands the game plan and kind of understands all that goes on both sides of the ball to winning a game like this, do you think the Georgia players knew? I mean, do you think they knew how dialed in they were that day, that it was really clicking for them kind of going into the game? Or is it one of those things that you're just never really quite sure of until it actually takes place? Did you ever have a moment when you're like, our game plan is so solid today that I know we're just ready for whatever comes our way?
Well, let's talk about game plan. I think which is going to put together a good game plan, but it's all about executing that game plan each and every Saturday. And we had the guys to go out and execute the game plan, had guys in front to disrupt the pocket, had the DBs to take care of business, and basically lock those guys down. Now, they did have 2 opportunities to hit 2 deep balls that they missed that could have changed a little bit of the flow of the game, but didn't do so. Georgia looked like we came in poised, had been there before, the experience. And Tennessee, it was their first big game, not at home, and they couldn't find a rhythm, couldn't get anything going. And I don't even know if they could hear each other talk on the sideline. It was so loud there. How
about Stetson Bennett in particular? What he does at the beginning of the game, the rushing touchdown, the strike to McConkey, really a beautiful throw to a Marcus Rosemy-Jackson on that touchdown. The quarterback position. What did you feel like watching Stetson performing at such a high level?
Yeah, I just thought his performance was solid. When is he going to get the real respect I think he deserves? You got Bryce Young at Alabama who gets all the praise and the glory over there, but Stetson's doing as good, if not better, on a better football team. So, I think Stet played phenomenally well. He took care of the football. He dished it where he needed to go. He took his shots when he needed to take shots. And, you can't say enough about Stet, the way he played. And to go out, put his body on the line, die for the pylon like he did, that's just what the guys want to see from the quarterback of their team as well.
We're watching on our video right now the image of Stetson holding the phone to his ears or pretending to hold the phone to his ears. Did you ever have anything like this happen to your career or hear about this to somebody else where, somebody gets a hold of that cell phone? It's probably not that hard to do if you really want to try to do that. And, ring you up all night long or something like that. Pretty clearly in Stetson's case, that was a motivation for him because he let him know a couple of times after those touchdowns. As a player yourself, I'm sure you may have encountered something like that.
Yeah, if you don't know Stet, stuff like that really gets him going. He loves being an underdog. He loves just that extra, just whatever it is, we'll call it stuff, just to get him motivated. Yeah. He loves that stuff. He feeds off of it. But myself personally, I've definitely gotten my fair share of a few bad messages and phone calls and prank calls here and there, but nothing where a fan base gets all on it together and calls me up all through the night. So I sleep with my phone on silent, so good luck with me.
Right there with you on that. And as you said, it's like after that first rushing touchdown, he gets up and he shows that. And then after the throw to McConkey, he turned around and like where the sort of pocket of Tennessee student and fans were in the corner of the west end zone, and he just pointed right at him. And it's like one of those things that, like, for some players that might take them out of their game, but in Stetson's case, it seemed to like bring him into the game even more. He really seems to feed off some of that kind of stuff.
He does. He loves it. There's always something to be, somebody out, somebody messing with Stet. And he's just dealt with it his whole life, and he knows how to deal with it. He knows how to take it, fuel it, and use it for good, and get the best play out of himself on Saturdays. And so it's fun to see. I love the charismatic way he does it, and I know the guys on the sidelines feed off of it as well.
So I'm curious about this, and I didn't play, but this is always what I've imagined must be like the hardest thing to do in college football, where okay, last Saturday, you're in a stadium where everybody loves you and everybody's patting you in the back and telling you how great you are. And this Saturday, now it's a Saturday night. You're going to Starkville. It's a place that most of these Georgia players, I guess all of them, have never really been before. Cowbells are going to be ringing. All of a sudden, everybody hates you. And we saw in the Missouri game how quickly that crowd kind of changed that game for the worse for Georgia. How do you process all that if you're Georgia? How do you maintain the right level of focus? And how do you get ready to kind of go do in a hostile environment what you did on Saturday when you had the win at your back with the crowd and all the things it was doing for you? Exact opposite this Saturday against Mississippi State. How do the players handle that, you think?
Yeah, it's just you got to switch gears. The march of really great football teams is winning in a bunch of different ways. I think it's going to start at practice. Kirby's going to dial that crowd noise up. He's going to have some cowbells going. He's going to make it as realistic as possible. He's going to get them dialed in and not thinking too much off the win this past Saturday. And he's going to nip that in the bud real quick. Hey, guys, great job. But this is a new week. And basically the college football playoff starts now. So we got to keep winning. And take care of business on Saturday.
Yeah, because, you had big wins in your career. I'm thinking about, like, say, Florida in 2018 or 2019. These are some really big wins when they came, and yet you do have to kind of get right back at it and go back to work again. Was it hard to do that? Was it hard to maintain what coaches sort of say is like a 24-hour rule? Is it hard to sort of turn the page when you just had such an emotional experience?
Yeah, the emotional ones, you use the word emotional. The emotional ones are tougher to do. But I think nobody does a better job of reeling in the focus than Coach Smart does for his players going into the week, because you treat it every week the same, a high level of intensity coming in. I think when you do that each and every week, it starts in training camp and then goes throughout the season. So when you continue to do that over and over and over again, you just train your mind, you train your body to just know how to do it. And I think those guys are experienced, they're poised, they know what they're doing. And they got some, I would say, vets on the team who's played in a lot of big football games. So I don't see it being an issue at all.
Jake, great stuff. Thank you for being here. I'm glad to hear your thoughts on a big day for Georgia. We're always very curious of your opinion, and we'll look forward to hopefully getting a chance to hear from you again very soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brandon.
Good stuff there from Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, a guy who was a big part of this program for a long time, and now furthering an NFL dream. We're obviously really proud for him on that, and really, really grateful for his time joining us here today. Also grateful for our friends at the Durham Law Group there as well, not just because they're a part of what we do here on our program, but also because they provide a great service for so many of you. If you've been hurt or injured, accident on the job, something like that, if something has happened to you that's kind of wronged you, well, you want to be made right again. That's where our friends at the Durham Law Group can step up and do great work for you, because they don't just practice personal injury law, they define it. What that means is they've committed to saying no fees, no expenses for you unless you win. If you get something out of the situation, then at that point in time, Durham Law Group will get something out of the situation. But prior to that, that's not what they want. They want to support you and try to make you whole again, get you made right, and get you what you deserve if you've been hurt or injured in an accident. So give them a call, 844-4GA-HURT, or online at georgiahurt.com. One more time, phone number 844-4GA-HURT, or the website online, spelled out, georgiahurt.com. Check out our friends at the Durham Law Group today. All right, total confession here. We probably have the best collection of golden shoes we've ever had, kind of in the queue to be shown, and it's one of those things where you sort of only have time for so many per day. So give me a couple of days here so if we can continue to sort of share all of these as it relates to what was just an unforgettable day in Athens on Saturday. Folks continue to celebrate on all that, and we're obviously really, really thrilled with the great display that's out there. In fact, some of you even made your own sort of customized videos as far as the Golden Shoe stuff goes. In fact, I want to show you one of these right now. I think this is absolutely tremendous. If you're listening to radio podcast, kind of a borrowed scene from a movie where like the little Tennessee creature kind of hops up there on the a spot there for a while, and it's the college football playoff, and Tennessee sort of thinks it has its moment in the sun, but then pretty soon, before you know it, going to get bumped right off that ledge and not a part of that anymore, and that's kind of exactly kind of the way some of this has gone down. I don't know if we have the credit we can share for Zach Johnson. Yeah, so Zach Johnson shared this with us. His wife, I guess, made this. It's a really good video, very well done, and it's worth kind of hearing the whole thing. It's really good stuff. So we've gotten some great submissions there on all of that, and all of this setting up for what we believe is go for 2 in 22. In fact, if you want to show the world you believe that's what Georgia's going to be doing, go for 2 here in 22, then you can go to the top of the page of DawgNation.com and click the link, and you can get your own go for 2 in 22 T-shirt to let everybody know the college football playoffs coming up. SEC championship could be coming up. The chance to own the East coming up on Saturday there as well. All of that could be going down here. It's the mission to be on. Go for 2 in 22, and you can get your Go for 2 in 22 T-shirt from the DawgNation store right now. So get involved, get it going, and you can be a part of all of that. So make sure you check that out today. And by the way, even while Georgia's on the mission of go for 2 in 22, still a mind towards those lousy, stinking Gators. In fact, we'll give you a Gatorator countdown. Remind them that 354 days from right now, we'll be back in Jacksonville for the cocktail party again, beating up on those lousy, stinking Gators again. We'd love to tell you about that. That's our Gatorator countdown. We are Go for 2 in 22, and we'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. That show, just about exactly an hour, which kind of counts as a short show for us these days, it seems like. But nonetheless, we'll hop in here and get your comments. We cannot go crazy long today. I've got a little bit of family stuff going on, so I can't do a ton of that. But we will get you out of here and get ready for a big week, obviously. Mississippi State, Starkville on Saturday. High school football playoffs start here in the state of Georgia this week, too, which we're kind of excited about. So, man, a lot going on. All right, let me go over to YouTube and see what they're arguing about over here. Hans McMahon says, how come Mississippi State doesn't have any ice on the sidelines? He says the guy with the recipe graduated, which is very funny. Very funny. Dolomite says, just keeping it real. Don't get me wrong. 2 losses ain't cool, especially when the Dogs doing what Alabama isn't coaching, but at this point I wouldn't wish Bill O'Brien on anybody. Yeah, the one thing that Alabama fans will tell you to a man is they're done with both these coordinators. They're done with O'Brien. They've been done with Pete Golding. They are done with them. Spencer Clark saying, do you remember Fred Smoot from Mississippi State? I do remember Smoot. I do. Swampy McGee says winning back-to-back national championships might become too exhausting. That is a level of exhaustion that I'm ready to experience. Thomas Van Sant says Ringo never fails. Awesome interception. It was an awesome interception. It really was. You go back and rewatch it, you realize how awesome it was. Our buddy AKA checking in to say any update on injuries. So in the case of Robert Beal, Kirby said that was a stinger, and they're expecting Beal to play on Saturday. In the case of A.D. Mitchell and Amarius Mims, sounds like for right now it's more of the same. Very few specifics there. Basically just sort of the dreaded hopeful to get him back type deal. So you can do with that what you will. But pretty good news there on Beal. Reported as just being a stinger. Expect to be playing. So it sounds like that might indeed be the case. Cindy OG says offensive line was pretty good on Saturday. Yeah, I thought so too. And, I would say that right now, this is a group that seems to be coming into its own. And I don't know, I have a little bit of a sense that this group may be better than last year's group was in total, and maybe I'm wrong about that. Some other people may say something different, but I feel like that's a big strength for Georgia right now. Scott Harris says, any comments on Jimbo Fisher and his dumpster fire? I guess my biggest comment on this is, obviously, I have certainly, owned the fact that this is one that I appear to have gotten really, really wrong. So I don't mind saying that as many times as is needed, that I expected Florida State to be far better what they've turned out to be. Now, by the way, I didn't necessarily predict them to be a top 5 team here this year, but I certainly wouldn't have imagined to be 3-6. So that is very, very clearly true. I think the most interesting thing that's going on in College Station right now is that some long-time strong pillars of support are starting to erode. I don't believe Jimbo Fisher could or would get fired this year, but last year when things were not going well for Texas A&M either, the truth is that Fisher's support was just as strong as ever because I think people legitimately believed that he was building something, and the recruiting success was kind of a part of that. Well, the recruiting stuff's only helping him so much right now. They're just not winning enough to make some of that recruiting stuff really matter. And in most instances, there is a little bit of a lag time between the big recruiting class, like in this case the number 1 class, and some on-field success. In most cases, that's probably the way it goes. And this is actually, kind of what we've said. For as long as I have been on Jimbo Fisher, there is one thing I've kind of gotten right, which is that if you allow talent acquisition enough time to kind of, it's almost like growing plants or something. If you allow it enough time to develop, eventually you'll reap a pretty nice benefit from that. But because of all the noisiness, the loudness of this recent class, that it might create a level of expectation for Texas A&M fans that will cause the weight of this to kind of implode on itself. For as long as I've been on Jimbo and Texas A&M, I am kind of right about that, is that what you see here is kind of, sort of a more intense level of impatience sort of born out of the fact they were so noisy in the way in which they went about building that number 1 class from a year ago. I think that's kind of what it is. But even if you say, hey, the most reasonable expectations for Texas A&M this year were to be like 8-4, like that was a reasonable expectation. Y'all, they're not even going to do that. And so that's what I think it ultimately comes down to. It's not that the people who thought they'd win championships were wrong. It's that the people who reasonably said, hey, can you at least be 8-4? They've turned out to be wrong there as well. And that's why the support for Jimbo is eroding in College Station. Biscuit says, I don't think that justice flips. You could very well be right about that. And you'll notice that, I don't mention much about Caleb Downs right now at all. I don't really see Downs as much of a factor in Georgia's class. But if there's a way to still get in there with Justice Haynes, if there's still a sliver of an opportunity, I'd love to see Georgia, kind of get involved on that. DMart42 says that Downs might flip to Ohio State. That could be, if he flips anywhere, that's where Downs would go, I believe. Jay Shipe says, I've seen some, Jay Shipe says over-under on Ole Miss rushing for 325 yards against Alabama. I mean, Alabama could lose again, I guess, but if they do, whoa, boy. Let's go. Brandon says, does Georgia cover the 17-point spread? I tell you this, I wouldn't bet my money on it. I mean, I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying that's not the kind of mood I'm in right now. And maybe I'm just not, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. But you're not going to have a whole lot of, and Georgia's going to go out there and beat Mississippi State by 100 points. That is not the kind of mood I'm in right now. I don't know that they will. I don't know that I necessarily need them to. I need Georgia to win on Saturday. That's what I need. I need Georgia to win. And so I think 17 seems like a lot. Now I understand why Georgia's favored by that much. But this is not a day for me where hey, I need to see Georgia show me something. I need to see Georgia hang a number. I'm not interested in that. I need Georgia to win, and I need to get ready to go on the road to Kentucky the following week. Yeah, that's just kind of what I need. Paul Moon says, I think we win ugly at Mississippi State, but a win on the road after an emotional game, still a win and a good one. I sort of kind of agree with Paul on that a little bit. I mean, hopefully it's not too ugly just because, that's a long way to go to watch an ugly game. But I kind of get some of that. I mean, here's the one thing that we know about Mississippi State. Y'all know this, the average person doesn't. They're just physically tougher than you sort of think of them being. This is not Texas Tech Mike Leach. This is not Washington State Mike Leach. There's a lot more SEC-style defense on this team. And I also kind of go back to, if you give coaches a long enough time to talk, they will eventually reveal to you what it is that they're worried about. And one of the things that Mike Leach had been told a bunch is, that he doesn't utilize the running game effectively enough to be an SEC coach. He clearly has been told that a good bit. And so, like, one of the things that he talked about unsolicited at SEC Media Days was the fact that he wanted his running backs judged by how well they also caught the ball coming out of the backfield. So it's pretty obvious that Leach knows that people think you're not a real SEC coach because you don't use the running, backs quite as well. Now, Kirby says they're rushing for more yards than you realize. Probably is true. But one of the things that Leach talked about at SEC Media Days is, hey, look at how much we throw to our backs. And if you add their rushing yards plus his receiving yards, how many people are getting more total productivity out of running backs than we are? This is something that he said back in the summer. Now, honestly, I'm not even quite aware fully what the stats necessarily are. But I do think that's part of the challenge with Mississippi State is they do want to throw to those backs out of the backfield. They do want to create sort of a passing game that sort of feels a little bit like a running game. They do want to do some of that. And, once again, you got to line up quick. And, as we said yesterday, like the Georgia false starts on Saturday, creating those false starts against Tennessee, it wasn't just moving them back 5 yards. It was slowing them down to give you a chance to reset yourself defensively. Well, on Saturday, you don't have that crowd behind you anymore. And so that creates a little bit of a challenge. Let's see what else. Scott Harris says 2 big games down, 2 big games to go. Yeah, you go back to like that stretch of Florida, Tennessee, road game. We sort of said that, and that's kind of what it is right now. Antoine Sampson says, who's worse right now, Miami or Texas A&M, or as he calls them, ATM? Coach contract, NIL, draft class, and current compared to record. Yeah, I'd like to think that Mario Cristobal is still a good coach. Wouldn't you like to think he'd still be a good coach eventually? I'd like to think that he would, but it's a fair comparison. And you might say the current situation for Miami is worse because at least Texas A&M's having this happen in the SEC West, but Miami's not even beating ACC teams. Barely beat Virginia, lost to Duke. Got blown out by Middle Tennessee State a couple of weeks ago, or was that Louisiana Monroe? I forget. They've had some awful things happen. South Georgia Dog says after Justice Haynes saw Georgia's dominant Saturday and the bloom starting to fade off Saban, you might just see a flip. That'd make me very, very happy. Johnny Surf Dog says, I'm still in awe how well our young defenders played and tackled, especially after losing Nolan and Beal. Totally fair. It was an amazing day. Get back coach saying that, or he says Mike Griffiths, get back coach. Saban's like, dadgummit, it looks like I'm going to have to start coaching again. I'm too old for this mess. I do think that part of the story for Nick Saban is that he too willingly delegated too much. And I just think that when you delegate something to somebody else, you are going to have to tolerate them doing it a little bit differently than you would. And listen, one of these days, Kirby's going to be whatever years old. At that point in time, he may look to be a little bit more of a CEO style coach. But think about like a restaurant owner. It's like that restaurant owner, in that restaurant every single day, and people who own restaurants, they'll tell you, man, that's as hard a work as you can do. The hours you put in, the strain that you have to sort of provide for success, and you're doing it all the time. And eventually you say, well, I've worked hard enough now, I can afford to pay somebody else to do this for me. Or I've worked hard enough that I can invest in a second location. But all of a sudden now there's a restaurant that you own that you're not managing on a day-to-day basis. And that's a big, big next step for any restaurant to take, when all of a sudden now you really are delegating that much responsibility to somebody else. And sometimes it goes well because you've got a strong enough system in place, and maybe sometimes the execution of that system being done by somebody else just does not work out quite as well. There are people in our audience right now that can tell that story, for the good or for the bad, about what it felt like to kind of let go of some day-to-day control of a business and let somebody else try to manage it for you. And that's maybe what Saban's kind of dealing with some right now too. There's Jimbo Fisher planting with Jimbo. Yeah. Giving those 5 stars a chance to grow and develop, and some of those folks getting a little bit impatient. Poor Jimbo Fisher didn't have a neck right there. You hate to see that. Cam Acey says Jimbo sounds like an auctioneer during his press conferences. It's entertaining. Yeah, I think part of the reason why some people sort of think of Jimbo as, air quotes here, used car salesman, people kind of have that sort of negative connotation of him is because of how he talks. Now, maybe this is also partially why I've been sympathetic to Jimbo over the years, is because I am also someone who talks very, very fast, and maybe we have that in our in common. Basil says, I'm hearing rumors swirling about a blackout for the Georgia Tech game. Rumor is that students are prepping for a blackout regardless if they wear the black jerseys. I'd love it. I mean, I'd be totally in favor of it. It'd be nice to kind of get that night game. Now, the problem here is that, I mean, a lot of students aren't going to be there. It's the Saturday after Thanksgiving, so a lot of them are going to be back home. And so, you won't quite get the same student response, although maybe for a night game blackout, people would come back, and maybe that's what you have to do here. I mean, obviously, it's not a motivational thing to beat Tech, because hopefully, you and me and 10 other people go out and beat Tech. But just for the fun of it, I'd love to do it. I mean, I've heard fans talking about it. I haven't heard it getting more serious than that, but I'd love it. I mean, if they did do it, night game like that, I think that'd be great. Cam Hasty, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Howard Moon, this is funny. Howard says, I feel so lonely this week compared to last week when my phone was constantly blowing up from all those Vol pals. They were so cute. Yeah, boy, they were really talking last week a ton. Basil also confessing here that the rumor for a blackout may have actually started with Basil. So sometimes there is something. Hey, did y'all hear the rumor about blah, blah, blah? No, where'd that rumor come from? Well, I started it. Oh, well, I guess we have heard that. Yeah, Basil, that's a good one. You may be right. And listen, push for it. I think it'd be great. I got no problem with that. I mean, I've said before, I wouldn't mind if they wore the black jerseys for every senior day, which is, the Tech game would technically be senior day. Kirby clearly, it's like you could see in 2016 Kirby's feeling on the black jerseys. What game do they choose to wear them for? Louisiana Lafayette. They wore them for that game. And then Kirby at the time said they will wear them for a game every year, and then for like several years they didn't wear them at all. So that kind of gives you a sense of how they feel about that, is they don't want blackout, like the way in which the Auburn game was for the good or the Alabama game was for the bad. Georgia does not want any part of that kind of thing anymore. But if you said every year for senior night, or I even said, hey, one of these years just wear them for every home game, and just sort of turn it into a fashion choice. Just wear them more frequently to kind of take some of the stigma away from them. I'd be fine with that too. Like make it obvious that it's not a motivational ploy, it's just something you're choosing to do, which I think by and large now people kind of understand. But if you wanted to say, hey, for senior day every single year, you get to wear the black jerseys, and if you want to wear them, I guess that doesn't make sense. But every year for senior night, you get to wear the black jersey, and if it's a night game, even more so. Now, here's what's going to be. And I hate to be this way. I sound like I'm being a troll, but what's going to be hilarious is that Georgia fans have been pushing night game. They may get one for the Tech game, but that's like late November. It could be like 15 degrees. It could be very, very cold. And so all of a sudden now it's like an episode of The Twilight Zone where okay, you finally got your wish. You asked for a night game and you got one, but it's the coldest night of the year thus far. It's like, can we have a night game a little earlier in the season next time maybe? So, yeah, I don't know. Let's go to Facebook for a moment and get a couple of comments over here. And then after that, we got to get ready to go. On Facebook. Eventually. Oh, Lord. Here we go. Sandy Price says, I say it every week, winning is the only stat that matters and the only trophy that matters. It's the national championship trophy. # go for 2 and 22. I like that. Dana Turk and Ryan Walker talking about Javon Bullard. Yeah, Bullard is, I think he's a very big-time performer for UGA. And it's also kind of an example of what I was saying during the regular show is that Kirby Smart's brand of football makes football a little bit more complicated, and Javon Bullard's a perfect example of this. It's like, think about what you're sort of asking a star position to be. And everybody that sort of follows Georgia kind of understands this, that, okay, well, it's a fifth defensive back, so you're running in pass coverage, but it's also kind of taking on some of the responsibilities of the Sam linebacker, because when a star comes on the field, the linebacker goes off the field, and so you've got some run stop stuff, and so you better be able to run, but you also better be about 200 pounds. It's like the average person, that just sounds like gobbledygook. It just sounds like, what? it's like the average person doesn't want to think that deeply about football. They just want to see quarterbacks throwing touchdowns. And Kirby's version of football requires a little bit of an understanding of the responsibilities the players have. And, it's like there's not a lot of internet shows, streaming internet podcast type shows talking about the fifth defensive back, right? But at a place like Georgia, a guy like Javon Bullard is really, really important, and not just because he had 2 sacks, or however many sacks he had. But Georgia fans have been made to, and probably are eager to, but certainly have been made to consider the role that like 40-something guys have, at least 30-something guys. I mean, Georgia plays, probably 20, 30 guys with regularity on defense. You're talking about almost that many on offense there as well. So maybe it's like 40, 50, 60 guys that ultimately help contribute to this team's success. And so, yes, 100% right. Bullard is absolutely very, very important to Georgia. But a guy like that being so important is, I believe, part of the reason why Georgia's very hard for some people to understand, because they just don't want to think that deeply. They don't want to get into, tell me about your nickelback. That's just not something that the average fan, or really even the average media member, wants to do, because it's just more football than some people want to consume. Chad Williams also bringing up a very good point. He says, I credit Stetson's barber for the win. He always plays better when he gets a haircut. Yeah, he kind of had that sort of high and tight look again, for sure. Ryan Walker also says it's time for the Dogs to put foots to them other hounds in the SEC that are from Mississippi. That's exactly right. I'd be in favor of, as I said before, it's like if Clemson plays LSU for the next year, only one team gets to be Death Valley. And, there's no way we should have 2 Bulldogs in the SEC. Georgia wins this game on Saturday for the next year. Mississippi State cannot be the Bulldogs. I'd be in favor of that. Miriam Corbin has a great line. She says, leadership cannot be loaned out. Consistency and leadership is essential to success in anything. Beautifully well said by our good friend Miriam Corbin. Andrew Hughes says, do you think that Coach Smart will sit players that would be playing against a stronger opponent for next few weeks in prep for the playoffs? I do not. I think Mississippi State's going to have to beat you. I do. Now, I don't think they will lose, but I don't think that Georgia could do that for a game like this. Now, I think that Georgia has been good enough that it hasn't had to rush players back, like A.D. Mitchell, somebody like that. They've been able to allow him to heal, and I think that's good. But I definitely have respect for Mississippi State on Saturday. I don't know how good Kentucky is right now. I'm just not quite so sure. But in the case of the game that Georgia's playing on Saturday, I think that Georgia wants its full component of players, and I think it feels like it probably needs them to win. Now, listen, we say all that, Georgia wins 42-0. That's obviously a possibility, right? But this is a game in which Georgia is going to try to be at full strength in the hopes that it simply wins, I believe. I believe that's the case. Johnny Prescott says, the only team getting bullied on Saturday is the Bizarro Bulldogs, obviously a reference to Bully, the mascot's name for Mississippi State. James Crum says, we are not missing the playoff again under Kirby Smart. Yeah, it's one of those things where, this is kind of that era, right? We've seen these playoff appearances kind of come in bunches for certain teams. And, this could be kind of that moment for Georgia where, find a way to get back there this year. And, you could be kind of in one of those little eras for yourself, as has been pointed out. Johnny Robinson says, what do you think about Ohio State? I think Ohio State is very good. I think that Georgia would obviously have a great chance of beating Ohio State, but I would say right now, Ohio State is, for me, the only team that's out there on the national landscape that sort of feels like a typical playoff team on the national landscape. And part of what I feel like I see for Ohio State is, and I'm never good at remembering the dude's name, but when Ohio State has let me see here for a minute. When Ohio State has really good teams, it seems like they always have an individual game wrecker on defense. Something that, say, Georgia is a lot more kind of team-centric with its defense, but Ohio State sort of always has a big defensive star. And they're kind of getting one of those kinds of years from, hold on one second, let me see. I never remember this guy's name. He's a 5-star from a couple of years ago that signed really late. I think it's Tuamalolo. I think that's what I'm sort of thinking about. I guess he only got 3 sacks in the season, but he had a huge game against Penn State. He had a huge game against Penn State. Like Michael Hall's having a good year for them, but it's Tua Malololo that I'm sort of thinking of here. I believe that's who I'm sort of thinking of here. That's like a former 5-star guy, kind of a late addition to their class a couple of years ago. He basically was accounted for like 21 points against Penn State the other day, and he's sort of that individual kind of guy I think of when I think about Ohio State. So, I mean, I have to tell you, if Georgia's path to the national championship is a 2-loss LSU in the SEC championship, a rematch against an Oregon, or a rematch against a Tennessee, and that's about as easy a path to the national championship as you could ever have. I'm not trying to be like provocative here. I'm just trying to be as honest as I know how to be. I do not believe that this year's LSU team, this year's Tennessee team, this year's Oregon team are typical playoff level teams. Ohio State clearly is. So right now, Ohio State is really the only team I sort of think that about. Now, maybe I'm underrating Michigan, for instance. Maybe I am. But I do believe Ohio State is the kind of team the likes of which you almost always have to play en route to a national championship. And I'm not really quite so sure right now who among the so-called national elite it would really be in that category. All right, final comments one more time through, and then we're done. Paul Moon says, I think I'd prefer Oregon. I mean, if you got a chance to play Oregon again in a college football playoff scenario, that is as lucky as you ever could be. And listen, anything can happen. I'm not guaranteeing a national championship. I'm telling you, a team like this Oregon team compared to like some of the other teams that have made the playoff in previous years, I just think that you would. I just think it'd be a very different type of thing. Antoine says you can't sleep on TCU or Michigan. Maybe you can't, although I do believe that TCU likely loses on Saturday. They may lose more than once before the year is done. If TCU made the playoff, it'd be by far and away the worst defensive team to ever make the playoff. By far and away the worst defensive team ever in the playoff, if they were to make it. Jonathan Aaron says, who do you think going to see in the SEC championship? Is it Kelly and his family or somebody else? I guess it's likely to be LSU, and they are playing better right now. But, I mean, once again, that is not a typical SEC championship game opponent for Georgia, the likes of which we've seen in recent years. It's just not the same type of thing. Kirby's Belt says all you have to do is pressure Tennessee. We're the only team Tennessee has played that has played any defense. In a couple of years, Tennessee may be incredibly dangerous. In a couple of years, maybe they are what LSU was in 2019. Maybe eventually that's the kind of program they're building, but I don't believe they're there right now. They are good enough that on a very good day, they could beat anyone. That is true. That's what Tennessee is right now. But I do not believe they are a typical playoff level team. I don't. I do not believe that they are a typical SEC champion level team. Not right now. Maybe in a couple of years from now when they add more recruits in the program. If anything, they are way ahead of schedule from where they should be. I'll give Josh Heupel credit for that. He has made them way better, way sooner than almost anyone could have viewed as possible. But even with crediting them for that, if the standard is what you normally expect to see in an SEC championship, which they won't likely be in, or a college football playoff, which they might be in, if you measure them against that typical standard, not close, not close. I mean, we had it for a long time. Teams like Clemson, really good on both sides of the ball. Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, 1 million first-round picks on defense. Alabama, good on both sides of the ball. Ohio State, when they've made the playoff, they've typically been pretty good on both sides of the ball. Last year, a bad defensive team didn't make the playoff, but when they've made the playoff, they've been pretty good on both sides. There is a certain, kind of across-the-board excellence that the typical playoff team sort of has. There's a lot. There are outliers. I mean, Michigan State's made it. Washington's made it. We've had, Cincinnati's made it. We've had outliers into the playoff. I'm not saying we haven't. I'm saying that the preponderance of playoff teams, though, are kind of across the board excellent. And right now, I think there's only 2 teams in the country for whom that's true. I believe Georgia is, and I believe Ohio State is. And the playoffs can at least have 2 other teams, assuming, by the way, Ohio State gets past the Michigan test, which is a little bit of an interesting discussion too. But as I can see it right now, I only see 2 teams that I believe are truly excellent. Maybe Michigan should be among that group for me, but for me right now, it's Georgia and it's Ohio State. All right, here we go. Jay Cole says, I don't believe LSU is good at all. They are better now than they were earlier in this year, but I'm still not quite so sure how good they are. Basil said, Ohio State's got Michigan at home this year. Yeah, they lost on the road last year. Now that's a return date to Columbus this year. That's very true. And then finally, Ken Holcomb says LSU is going to be a big factor now that Kelly is there and can get good players. That was not going to happen at Notre Dame, and he knew it and jumped ship as soon as he could. He is a good coach. I would say for right now, this is kind of working out the way that he planned to, with him moving to LSU to get better access to players and do something at LSU that he was not going to be able to do at Notre Dame, which is win a national championship. And I think that thus far he's being pretty well received there in Baton Rouge. All right, so let us get ready to wrap up. We had the fire alarm come on. That fire alarm come on 9 million times the last couple of weeks. So we're going to say goodbye for now. Check out the AJC online, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. Today is Election Day. Last-minute election guide, information about the polls, maybe where you even need to vote or like who you want to vote for. All of that online, AJC.com. Check that out. Who you vote for is your business, but I will tell you this. When it's time to make your vote for air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, R.S. Andrews is the only name on the ballot for that, though. You can find them online. Your water heater goes out. In many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. Find them there, rsandrews.com, for a lot more on that. They even bring the R.S. Andrews cool down to us each and every day. Y'all have a great day. I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll talk to you then.